ahead and open up episode 628 of the podcast devoted to the classic and sometimes not-so-classic genre cinema of yesteryear with the song Berlin. It is from the band Wave Electric, and it's from their album self-titled debut LP. That is literally the name of the album. You can check them out over at waveelectric.bandcamp.com when you're done listening to this episode of Monster Kid Radio, or should I say Kaiju Kid Radio. I'm your writer, host, producer, Derek M. Cook, welcoming you to the show this week. We are week 3 into Kaiju 2023. I've had a blast spending this time focused on Kaiju films. I think this is going to be a yearly thing, I hope. And yeah, just keep this Kaiju love going every year here on Monster Kid Radio during the month of July. That's not to say that we're only going to talk about Kaiju films in July, or that we're going to save July for the Kaiju. Doesn't matter. Kaiju is in full swing right now, and this week we are revisiting a film that has been covered here on the show in the past. It's Frankenstein Conquers the World. It's one that we've talked about in the past, but I love it. It's such a great film. It's one of my favorite non-Godzilla, non-Gamera, non-reptilian beast Toho films, Kaiju films, and I get to talk about it with a friend of the show, Monster Kid Radio irregular Bryan Clark. That's coming up this week on the show. Also, the return of Kenny's look at Famous Monsters of Filmland. A lot of you have been reaching out to me asking me, what's up with Kenny? What happened to the Kenny segment? Well, Kenny's been busy. He's got a real life and real job and real responsibilities, and, well, you know, he just had to deal with some stuff, and he's back with a look at Famous Monsters of Filmland this week, plus Mark Matzke's Beta Capsule review. Now, we had a glitch last week. I'm blaming Red King for this. Last week's Beta Capsule review was actually an older edition of the Beta Capsule review, so we're going to play what was supposed to be last week's Beta Capsule review this week, and then what was going to be this week's is going to be played next week, which basically means Mark is getting a week of production off, and believe you me, he needs it, because he was just at G-Fest, and from what I understand, he had a grand time. I would love to hear about how G-Fest went for anybody who went, everybody who went. Feel free to give me a call at 360-524-2484 or drop me an email at monsterkidradio@gmail.com and let me know how G-Fest went. I'd love to hear all about it. But first, I'd love to hear about the Beta Capsule review, the Famous Monsters of Filmland, and Frankenstein Conquers the World, so that's coming up right now.
Pounding across the motion picture screen comes the most terrifying monster of them all. Gamera, the Invincible. Gamera, the super monster that even the H-bomb cannot destroy. Gamera, the Invincible.
Attention everyone! Take cover!
Gamera, consuming raw atomic power. Power to destroy entire cities.
Open fire!
Man's most destructive weapons have no effect on Gamera, the Invincible. The mightiest nuclear weapons ever devised are powerless against Gamera, the Invincible. Is humanity doomed? Will the world be destroyed? The United Nations is called to emergency session in a last desperate effort to save the world.
We have one plan that we think might work. We have discussed Plan Z with the Japanese authorities, and they agree it is the best of our alternative plans. Is that correct, sir?
That is so. Plan Z is hope of the world.
A cast of thousands at the mercy of the most terrifying monster that ever lived. Brian Donlevy as General Arnold.
Is beyond comprehension. He must be stopped now.
Albert Decker as the Secretary of Defense. Will Plan Z stop Gamera? Gamera, the Invincible.
It's 1966. The space race is on. The Cold War is heating up, and giant monsters are destroying Japan. Kaiju Attack, from award-winning author Stephen D. Sullivan. Now available in all ebook formats on Amazon, Smashwords, Drive-Thru Fiction, and other quality outlets, and in print on Amazon.com. Find more info at daikaijuattack.com, sdsullivan.com, and the Daikaiju Attack group on Facebook. Join the action today.
Live from the Land of Light in Nebula M78, home of the mighty Ultra Heroes, it's Monster Kid Radio's Beta Capsule Review. Return of Ultraman, Episode 21, The Monster Channel. Original air date, August 27th, 1971. 4 a.m. In Setagaya, an office worker's youngest daughter, 5-year-old Mikako, awoke to turn off the television. Just then, a picture of a civilian plane flying over the East China Sea appeared. Monster Attack Team member Minami was evidently up and watching because he telephones Go to turn on his TV just in time to observe the destruction of the Japanese passenger plane. No more than an hour later, MAT meets to discuss the facts, which indicate a high-powered signal of unknown origin and the tragedy of the downed flight, which was witnessed on televisions around the globe. MAT Arrow 1, piloted by Ueno and Go, takes to the skies over the East China Sea, and they immediately encounter Kaiju Beacon, breaking through the clouds. Narrowly avoiding its laser beam, the duo return with photographic proof of the monster's existence. MAT determines that Beacon absorbs electric signals for energy and can transmit its own signals. The point is proven when Beacon generates another broadcast showing two planes colliding in midair, followed by a dogfight with the MAT Arrow 1, in which the monster emerges victorious. Go hatches an ambitious plan to shut off all electronics in Tokyo and lure Beacon out over the ocean with a high-frequency signal, but the monster is instead drawn to a boy operating his ham radio. As Beacon scours the neighborhood, Go rushes to the scene, locating the boy moments before his house collapses. Is it too late for him to transform into Ultraman? The Monster Channel is an inventive episode, packed with fresh ideas and a renewed visual flair, culminating in a gorgeous sunset battle segment. The concept of Beacon being able to broadcast its violent actions and consume electric signals practically begs to be interpreted at some deeper level, while other media commentary is made by a humorous scenario involving a housewife trying to watch her soap opera. This might have been a minor classic in the Return of Ultraman canon were it not for the underwhelming design of Beacon, whose static, expressionless face conveys little menace, and whose upright form is more droopy than demonic. It's the only weak link in an otherwise strong outing, and the last episode before big changes begin at MAT. For Monster Kid Radio's Beta Capsule Review, this is Mark Matzke reporting.
Now, giant entertainment. Giant Terror, The War of the Gargantuan, and Monster Zero.
Do you see anything?
From a planet 50 million miles beyond the stars came a strange message. Lend us your Rodan and Godzilla to fight our Monster Zero. Earth answers, and the most dreaded creatures ever to walk our planet are lifted into outer space. The stage is set for the mightiest battle ever seen by the universe in Monster Zero.
All forces on Earth ready to attack.
What started out as a call for help from space turns into a nightmare of terror on Earth, Monster Zero. And the War of the Gargantua. It began with a mysterious, wild storm at sea, and before the night was over, the whole world would hear of the terror of the Gargantuans. Where had such a monster come from? What forces created such a devastating destroyer? Who or what could stand up to it? Let him have it! Armies fought the monster with million-volt laser beams.
Hey, look! Another one!
You'll see all of their terrifying battle to the death when you come to the greatest monster movies ever made, The War of the Gargantuas and Monster Zero.
Hello there, Monster Kid Radio heads. This is Kenny with a look at Famous Monsters of Filmland. Today's film, Frankenstein Conquers the World, was featured on the cover of Famous Monsters number 39 from June of 1966. Inside, we find a 15-page article with a whopping 21 photos. Here are some highlights and an interesting behind-the-scenes look at the writing of a preview article in Famous Monsters. Frankenstein versus Baragon. Baragon, the rhinoceros horn reptilian remnant from the age of dinosaurs, a gigantic monster. Frankenstein versus the giant devilfish. Nuff said. These two titles were used to describe the new Japanese-American color collaboration, the monster movie 3 years in preparation and shooting. At last, the film will emerge on the screen. Its final name? Frankenstein Conquers the World. How, all horrordom has wondered, could the Frankenstein monster fight a dinosaur? Or a giant devilfish? Even a baby Bronto could squash Frankenstein with one of its huge paws, and a king-sized devilfish could make Deviled Man out of Frank with one bone-crushing squeeze. Ah, but not if Frankenstein were over 60 feet tall. And in this new thriller, he is. A brief synopsis follows, and it isn't very accurate. Foria explains why next. P.S. Now, before every film monster fan from America to Antarctica, from Azerbaijan to Zanzibar, writes in to tell Yi Ed that he must have dreamed up the foregoing review in bed, because there is no mention of Frankenstein's fight with the devilfish, or that he should consult his eye doctor about getting a new prescription for his bifocal glasses, because the description of Frankenstein being European doesn't fit the photos, which look like he's Oriental. Let me once again patiently try to explain something to you, ungentle readers. It would be ideal if 6 months before the release of every monsterific picture, I could personally see a preview of it and take along a mini tape recorder to take down the dialogue for future reference. Alas, this is an idle dream. It rarely happens that way. Instead, I'm lucky if I get a hold of a press book with its often skimpy synopsis or some sort of mimeographed information sheet. When the picture is a foreign one, like Italian or Japanese, I often suspect that the translator learned English from an IBM machine. Feed an IBM machine a sentence like "children shrink from washing," and ask to have it translated back, and what do you suppose you're liable to get? Think about it. When washed, children grow smaller. Possibly, if it's a real hip machine, it knows that shrink also means shy away from, and just might come up with the translation, children shy away from being washed. Of course, even that sentence might get garbled into children, timid, gone, from creature, washed. Well, a being is a creature, isn't it? So when it's a foreign film, I'm lucky if the storyline is halfway intelligible. Here are some actual quotes from the handout on Frankenstein Conquers the World, from which I have attempted to make some sense for you. Dr. Bowen is conducting research in resuscitation of destroyed Tushu. The giant is terrifying Clitisons. The hand dies of swallowing the albumin solution. Huh? About to destroy some of Baragon's party, Baragon finds itself confronted by the Frankenstein giant. Baragon's party? They must have meant Bowen's party. Then, to doubly confuse matters, after carefully establishing that the F-monster is European and not Oriental, I get a second synopsis from the studio, with even less info than the first, with one very important difference. In describing the origin of the new Frankenstein, it states that an orphaned waif in the heart of the Hiroshima Holocaust finds the heart of the Frankenstein monster and, driven by the hunger pangs of starvation, eats it. Thus, the baby being Japanese, the giant that he grew into would be a Japanstein monster. Just be grateful you only have to read these reviews and not write them. That is all for this week's look at Famous Monsters of Filmland. We will have more next time. For MKR, this is Kenny saying adios.
From beyond the stars come the most fearsome monsters in the galaxy. Only Godzilla stands in their way in Godzilla on Monster Island. Is even Godzilla strong enough to defeat the invaders? Matching unbelievable strength, exchanging incredible death-dealing rays. Don't miss Godzilla on Monster Island, rated G.
Atragon, the ninth wonder of the world. Atragon, an earth mover. A flying fortress. A submarine. Atragon, technology's newest, fights all the powers of black magic. The mysterious submerged continent of Mu attacks our world.
I am agent number 23 of the Mu Empire. This earthquake is not accidental.
Terror panics civilization. As cataclysmic forces clash, Atragon in color.
This is Count Dracula, and I'm here to offer you a friendly warning. Derek and his guests often get excited, and occasionally this results in revealing key plot points of the movies they're discussing. You know how the children of the night, monster kids can get sometimes. So consider yourself warned. And don't come begging to me to kill them for their transgressions afterward. I have more pressing issues to take care of, like that pesky Van Helsing.
Monster Kid Radio listeners, we've talked about this movie before on the show, but it's been over 400 episodes or so since we talked about it. I wanted to talk about it again. This week's guest wanted to talk about it again, so we're going to talk about it again. We're talking about a movie starring one of my favorite guys, Nick Adams, and I'm talking about it with one of my favorite guys, Bryan Clark. How you doing, man?
Oh, thank you very much. I'm doing good. And it's great to be back here on Monster Kid Radio.
It has been a while since you've been on the show, quite some time. What's going on with you?
I just put out a collection of short stories called Putting the Ground to Sleep. That's probably the biggest news from Camp Clark. You can find that on Amazon. It's free to read if you have Kindle Unlimited. There's an ebook version. There's a print version. I even got it into a couple of local stores, which is kind of neat.
Oh, so cool.
I also recently recorded some voiceover work for an upcoming band. A couple of friends of mine have a new death metal band called Adversion that will be releasing an EP soon, and they wanted some sort of spooky narration voice type stuff on it. So now I'm going to be on another record.
That's so cool, man. You wanted to take some time out to talk to me about a kaiju film, so I'm happy.
Yeah, I'm always down to talk kaiju.
Oh yeah, and I think the listeners will be happy too. This is a good one. This is one of my favorite kaiju films. One of my favorite non-Godzilla kaiju films. It's so unique, and I dig the way they weave the Frankenstein mythos into everything without kind of hitting us over the head with it. There's that little bit at the very beginning, and then, oh, okay, of course it's Frankenstein, no problem. Then move on. Plus, we got Nick Adams, and Nick Adams is my guy. Like, if I can't get John Agar, get me Nick Adams,
Absolutely, yeah. I love Nick Adams. He's so good in the Toho movies that he made, too. It was kind of a letdown to have him be replaced in the sequel to this with Russ Tamblyn, who kind of visibly didn't want to be there when Nick is so enthusiastic and really gave it his all.
visibly didn't want to be there, and verbally. I mean, you could
yeah.
in the American dub where he came back in to redo his lines again, you could tell he's just like, he's over it. It's like, let me just get through this so I can go to lunch.
Right.
Whereas Nick Adams seems to be just happy to be here and just having a good time. And like I said, Nick Adams is my guy. I know sometimes I talk about John Agar being the guy, but if I could have had a John Agar, Nick Adams, like buddy picture of some sort, man, I'd be in heaven.
A road picture.
I've talked about it. I think I've probably mentioned it on the show in the past. I'd love to have some sort of like my fan fantasy, whether it's like writing some fan fiction or something. It's John Agar and Nick Adams driving across the country, Route 66 style, fighting monsters, and every once in a while they have to pull up at the mechanic shop that happens to be run by Whit Bissell to make sure the car's okay. You know, that's my fan project.
Of course, it would be Whit Bissell running the garage. That would be fantastic.
So with this movie, Frankenstein Conquers the World, what is your background with it? What do you remember the first time you saw it?
Yeah, I didn't get to see this one until the Media Blasters Tokyo Shock DVD came out. It was kind of hard to see for a long time because I didn't like have cable or anything growing up, so I never got to catch it on TV. It was kind of past the time, you know, when I was a kid where this was going to be shown on TV a lot. And, you know, it had never come out on digital home video. I'm sure there was a VHS that cost $1 million somewhere. But yeah, it was for one reason or another. I just didn't get my hands on this one until I think it was maybe earlier mid 2000s when that DVD came out. I actually, one of the weirdos who likes this more than War of the Gargantuas, that tends to be the one that everyone says is like their favorite non-Godzilla kaiju movie. But I actually like this one a lot more.
You know, I'm going to join you on that one. I know that War of the Gargantuas gets a lot of love, and rightly so. You know, the Gargantuas themselves are pretty darn cool. They look great, especially once you get a really good transfer and you can actually see them. They look fantastic, and the movie overall is fantastic. I won't downplay that one, but this one, Frankenstein Conquers the World, is actually my preferred of the two as well. Partly because of the Frankenstein connection. I love my Frankenstein, but I feel like, again, it goes back to Nick Adams. He really kind of carries the enthusiasm of the film for me. It's not just a Nick Adams show, but I really gravitate toward this one other than the other one too. So you're not alone, man.
Well, that's good. That's good. And yeah, like you said, no slander at all on War of the Gargantuas. That's still a great movie, but it's something about it is Nick Adams is a big part of it. Yeah. And just the tone of this one is a little darker. It's a little more like a horror movie. In fact, this was touted by Toho as the first of a series of horror sci-fi crossover pictures when they made a production deal with UPA, the American studio, and Henry Saperstein. And this was the first fruit of that co-production deal. And the treatment was originally even written by Jerry Stoll, not Takeshi Kimura. And this had gone through several different iterations. Originally, it was going to be a sequel to The Human Vapor, where they had Frankenstein as a normal human-sized monster fighting the human vapor. And then it was going to be Frankenstein versus Godzilla, and then they decided they didn't want to use Godzilla and invented Baragon, who is a great kaiju.
Yes.
He's very cute. He's kind of a puppy. But but he's very popular and came back in a bunch of different movies. And boy, that suit was popular. Tsuburaya got a lot of mileage out of that. You know, chopping it up and turning it into different monsters for Ultraman to fight. Yeah,
you know, we just did, and I know, Brian, you haven't heard it yet because we're recording this before that episode came out, but we just did the Ultraman Kaiju Roundtable with Mark Matzke and Anthony Wendell. And yeah, we talk a little bit about how some of the suits were recycled, and Tsuburaya was very efficient. I suppose is one way to put it. Very aware of waste. And if things were already built, then why rebuild them? Let's just put a frill on something or put an extra spine on it here or change the color there and boom, new monster. I do like Baragon as well. You mentioned that he's very puppy-like. He is very puppy-like. But it's still fun to watch him get beat up by Frankenstein.
Sure.
Which
I'm looking forward to listening to that roundup or that roundtable episode. And I hope my boys Pestar and Dinosaur Tank got some love.
Oh, well.
They're my favorite Ultra Kaiju.
Oh, well, okay. Good for you. I know listeners now are like, oh no, but yeah, I don't want to ruin it for you. So yeah, good. I'm glad you like them. Anyway,
no, I'm nervous. I'm gonna get kicked off the show.
No, not at all, not at all. In fact, I hope to get a lot of feedback on that because I want to hear what some of the other kaiju from the Ultraman franchise should have been talked about during the roundtable, because there's a lot to pick from. There's a lot to pick from, but I'm rehashing what was already discussed in last week's episode. I want to focus on Frankenstein Conquers the World. You mentioned a name that no, that's not a problem at all. I'm glad you bring it up because it gives me a chance to kind of go back, and you mentioned a name that came up when Robert Kelly was on the show a couple weeks back as well. And I've never really talked too much or dove too much into this guy, Henry Saperstein. Saperstein? This guy, I feel like, is pretty important in terms of getting some of these movies over here. Do you know much about the guy?
Not a ton. He imported Mothra versus Godzilla, and I think just sold it to, either struck a deal with or just straight up sold the distro rights to AIP for that one. But he really liked it. He thought it was a really good movie and wanted to make more of them. And he, at least at first, got along well with Ishirō Honda. And that's how they wound up striking this deal that Honda would make these movies for him, but he would also have script input, creative input. And yeah, it got a lot of great stuff made. He may have stepped on Honda's toes a little too much sometimes, I think. But in the end, we got some great stuff that we probably never would have had without him.
Right.
And it's unfortunate that so many of the 60s Toho movies, sci-fi movies that we love, were born out of John Beck stealing King Kong from Willis O'Brien. Originally, it was going to be King Kong versus Frankenstein, and then the two split off in a bunch of Godzilla movies, and King Kong movies were made with the Kong side, and then the Frankenstein went this route. But Saperstein didn't have anything to do with that. I think that was a separate thing. He wasn't involved in that.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. Yeah, with John Beck, he was the one that approached them about, or sold them the script for King Kong versus Frankenstein. And, the rights regarding King Kong, no, he's not in the public domain. No, he's not, based on folklore or anything like that. King Kong is a trademarked character from a copywritten source. So you really couldn't have done that without getting permission to do so. I'm not sure what the thought process was there back in the 60s. I know there was some question about King Kong's rights at one point, but I believe RKO and then whoever absorbed that library did some things kind of behind the scenes and technically retain the copyright. But again, it's not in the public domain. It's not something you should have been able to do anything with. But it did ultimately lead to this, which, again, I find fascinating. Like, how do you make Frankenstein a kaiju-sized monster? Yeah, well, this movie does it, and I love it. I love the very beginning of the movie. I love that whole bit with, having the scientists taking a piece of Frankenstein's brain, and just, I love that.
Yeah, that's interesting that we're never really told whether that is supposed to be a descendant of the original Baron Frankenstein, or if that's just a scientist working for the Third Reich. He's certainly in a mad lab in a castle, which suggests that he is a descendant of Frankenstein. Because at one point, they do say, that the original story of Frankenstein is part of the continuity of this. They say that this monster has been alive for hundreds of years, and that its heart is immortal.
I'm sorry, I said brain, didn't I? I meant heart. I'm sorry.
But yeah, that opening scene, and what I said before about this having more of a horror tone, that opening scene is a big part of that, aside from the model shot of the battlefield and those wonderfully familiar Toho sound effects. Oh, so it good. feels more like an Italian Gothic horror in that opening scene than it does a Japanese science fiction movie.
Ooh. I could see that or hear that. Yeah, no, that makes sense. I like that.
And some of that also might be because there isn't a really good clean print of this. Like the prints on the DVD that I have look like they were taped off a television. I mean, it's still kind of washed out, lots of artifacting, lots of film grain. It would be great if eventually Criterion would put this one out too, because I know they bought up a lot of the other non-Godzilla Showa era films too, and they got the Godzilla library, but they've just had them on their streaming service. So I don't know if there is a cleaner print of this streaming now, but
yeah, I'm not sure. I know that the movie has been released. Let's see, Tokyo Shock put out a release of it here on disc. There's a release in Japan, and I believe there was a German release as well, which would make sense.
Right.
Germany seemed to latch on to Frankenstein as their catch-all monster word for a lot of their movies, and would say Frankenstein this, Frankenstein that, even if it had nothing to do with Frankenstein's monster. But I don't know which one is the best transfer, the Japanese or the American.
I would imagine the Japanese one's a little more cleaned up as possible. Toho may have put it out on Blu-ray there, and it just hasn't come there yet.
You'd think, but then the Japanese DVD release of War of the Gargantuas is muddier than the American release. So I don't know. Either way, I would love to see a really nice print of this or transfer of this at some point, because it's such a good film. And you're right, it does have that darker tone. And I don't know if it's because Russ Tamblyn sounds so disinterested in his dub of War of the Gargantuas or what, but there's just something about War of the Gargantuas that just doesn't feel as heavy as this one. And I like my monster movies to be scary. I want that heaviness. I want that sense of...
Right, and there's no words get stuck in my throat in this. There's no little interludes of weirdness to, of levity to break up that tone, so it feels the same all the way through. You don't have, and there's another Saperstein thing, shoving his girlfriend. You got to have my girlfriend in the movie. She's going to sing a song. But luckily that didn't happen here.
No, I can't imagine this one being interrupted with something like that. This one it's got that kind of pseudo-gothic vibe, and you couldn't interrupt it with that.
And of course they pay a lot of homage to the Jack Pierce Frankenstein makeup and the design of the monster, and he gets more monstrous as he grows. When they first find him, he's a little kid. He looks kind of strange, but mostly normal, and then as he grows, he gets more of the flat top, and the Japanese cast and crew are all big fans of the James Whale Frankenstein and Karloff's performance in particular. In fact, Nick Adams had just made Die Monster Die, which was also written by Jerry Stoll, the guy who did the original treatment for this. He had just come from working on that to working on this, and so they were all very enamored. Oh, you got to work with Karloff. They wanted stories about Karloff because they all were big fans.
That's awesome, and rightly so. I mean, Karloff was a master, and the Frankenstein's monster is iconic. It is one of the classic monsters that you think that anybody thinks of when you think about classic monster movies, right? You think about Frankenstein's monster. He just looks amazing. What I like about this Frankenstein, though, and this one in Frankenstein Conquers the World, yeah, it pays homage, but they weren't so slavishly devoted to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
it still feels like a Toho creation.
Yeah, absolutely. He's more feral, caveman-like. It doesn't have bolts in his neck, that kind, because he's regrown from the heart, so he's purely organic. There are no stitches or anything like that. But
exactly. Now, they couldn't have gotten away with the bolts in the neck. That was a trademark thing for Universal, as is the flat top head, technically. But this one, while there's hair covering it, so maybe it's not exactly a flat top head. You're right. It does have that more organic feel, which I dig. You know much about the guy who played the monster?
Yeah, the Frankenstein monster is played by Koji Furuhata, and he had never acted before. It was the first time, came in and auditioned for it, and they put green contact lenses in to help him look German, I guess, because amusingly enough, they insist throughout the whole movie that, oh, he's Caucasian, he looks German. He's like, no, he doesn't. He looks like a Japanese guy.
He really does.
Not even close. And the other, like the green contact lenses they put in to do that, they didn't seem to have made his irises green, just to, change his eye color, but it looks like they made his entire eye, like they're scleral contact lenses, so they make the whites of his eyes look green too. So it just makes him look more monstrous, but not necessarily German.
Caucasian.
Yeah.
But it works. I mean, the look works.
Oh, yeah, it's very cool. And then, of course, Baragon is Haruo Nakajima.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Kind of one of the go-to guys, right?
Yeah, yeah. And the suit being crawling on its hands and knees probably has something to do with it. It's different proportions than Godzilla and that, but it's not something where you watch it and go, oh, he's just being Godzilla again. And that's also a testament to what a great performer Nakajima was, that this monster has a completely different personality than Godzilla. He knew how to alter his movements and his performance to show that this is something else.
Right. Well, and that's one of the things that I love about these suit actors from this era. Well, just Toho in general. It's not just a guy in a suit. And you know, sometimes I say, you know, I like a guy in a suit. And I'm not trying to, you know, downplay it or whatever. I do like a guy in a suit, but I like a skilled guy in a suit.
Mm-hmm.
Did that make sense? And I feel like, especially with this era of Toho, they were really just, the suit actors are amazing. They really are. Sure, yes, some of the work is done by the suit, but the suit acting and just the monster performances, I feel like they really cared. And it's one of the reasons why I think Toho movies resonate so well with so many people. And now with me, like I said on a recent episode of MKR, I did not grow up with these because I kind of actively avoided them. I didn't get it. Now I do. And I love them.
So saying that, when did you first see this movie then?
It was part of my journey, part of my quest to watch all the Godzilla movies as quickly as possible. Mm-hmm. Once I decided that I did like them and they were for me as much as anybody else. So I would say within the past 10 years.
I'm sure this one, you already had the classic horror love, so there was something a little more for you to connect to in this one than some of the others.
I immediately latched onto it. So when I first started my Godzilla journey, it was after seeing, you know, the movie at the Hollywood, the King Kong versus Godzilla, and just absolutely loving it. And that one also had something I could connect to because it was the American cut, which meant it had a ton of Creature from the Black Lagoon music in it. And so,
right.
You know, it's just what they did, and I loved it. So I went through and I made it a point to watch all the Toho movies in order of their release. At least for the Godzilla movies. Some of the other ones that I knew didn't have Godzilla and I just kind of bounced around a little bit. So Rodan I watched kind of out of technical order, I suppose, of when they first came out. And this one is also one that I knew it wasn't a Godzilla movie, so I was like, I don't need to be beholden to any kind of continuity. I'm just going to go watch it. If that makes sense. So yeah, within the past 10 years was when I saw this one. And I loved it then. You know, I love the take on Frankenstein. And I was used to different takes on Frankenstein at that point, because of like the Hammer films and that sort of thing.
Sure.
Frankenstein 1970. You know, I knew Frankenstein was, you know, for everybody. So anybody could do a Frankenstein movie. So I was okay with the different take on Frankenstein in this. And again, I loved it, you know, with the giant beating heart of what becomes the giant Frankenstein, but the beating heart of Frankenstein, and the way they kind of played off of World War II and Hiroshima and all of that, really kind of almost being too on the nose regarding, you know, Godzilla's origins and that sort of thing in terms of like working the bomb in and everything, but still worked so well. This
is the only time, despite there being so much use of the themes of atomic war in these movies, this is the only time Honda and Tsuburaya ever actually tried to recreate the bombing itself.
Yeah.
So this is definitely the most on the nose, as you're saying, of that. And the final script was done by Takeshi Kimura, who was one of Toho's two main sci-fi screenwriters at the time, along with Shinichi Sekizawa. And Sekizawa's scripts were a lot more upbeat, hopeful, playful, a lot more the theme of what Honda called the brotherhood of man. You know, we can work together and win. Whereas Kimura's scripts were bleaker and a lot more political, kind of to match his personality. Because Sekizawa, they were both pacifists, they were both anti-war, but Sekizawa was a very optimistic kind of guy. And Kimura, he was a member of the Japanese Communist Party. He was kind of a misanthrope. Not that has anything to do with being part of the Communist Party, but he was a lot more actively political, so he worked a lot more of that into his scripts. And they even show, like, when the bomb goes off, that building with the dome on top, they kind of make it seem like that's where they're doing the experiments on Frankenstein's heart. But that is actually a place called the Atomic Bomb Dome. And it's the only building in the blast site in Hiroshima that was left standing because the bomb went off almost directly over it. So the blast was straight down rather than pushing it out. And it had these big columns that helped it stay up. And so they've now, it was originally built in 1915 as a place for art and educational exhibits. That's gone through many different uses over the years. And now it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And they keep it up in that ruined state that you see it later in the movie after the bomb goes off as kind of a reminder of the horrors of atomic war. But even so, they never treat either the German characters as bad guys or the American character. Obviously one of our leads is an American, and that was part of Saperstein's thing. We have to have Hollywood stars, albeit affordable ones that are on their way down. No big Hollywood stars, no money for that.
That goes back again, though, to what you were saying a second ago regarding it feeling like an Italian Gothic, because that's what they would do too over in Italy. They would bring in somebody from Hollywood so they can get that American audience, but not somebody super expensive. So yeah, it kind of lends itself to that.
Absolutely.
I didn't mean to derail what you were saying, but...
Oh, no, that's okay. Bowen has ties to the bomb. At one point, he says that he worked on it and felt so horrified by what it did to Japan that he moved to Japan to help find treatments for radiation sickness. And, how many movies do you see that have Nazis in them where the Nazis aren't the bad guys? They're just wallpaper. And they show Japanese soldiers picking up the heart from the Nazis and bringing them back. And then one of those soldiers is a secondary character who's fairly important in the movie. He runs the oil field that Baragon destroys when we first find out that there's another monster besides Frankenstein. I like that there's some complexity to that. That these are all just people doing their best. And whatever ends they're working toward is kind of unimportant. Or I shouldn't say that they're unimportant, because obviously Bowen is trying to help people dying from the bombs. But
right,
am I making any sense here?
No,
I feel like my point has just kind of fell apart.
No, you're absolutely right. And to be clear, Nazis are fist magnets. I mean, Nazis are not, are not.
No, yeah.
But no, you're absolutely right. It would have been really easy to make them just the cartoon villains.
Right. Yeah, I didn't mean that the movie is soft pedaling.
No, not at all.
It just doesn't make any noise of it either way. They're just there, and that's it.
And it's interesting. It's a different take, and that's another reason why I like this movie as well, is that they're not caricature villains. They are clearly the Nazis, but as much baggage as that can bring to a production, they just kind of are there. It's not their story, so introduce them, move them on. Move along. Let's get to what we're really doing here. And I do like Bowen's portrayal as well. There's this real sense of regret, even though I guess he does say he did work on the bomb and that sort of thing. But there's this sense of regret and responsibility that Nick Adams puts into his performance as the Doctor. And I really responded well to that. I really like that. So yes, you're making
Mr. Kawai. That's the Japanese soldier was on the submarine crew, who's later the oil field guy. And there's the commentary track with Sadamasa Arakawa, who is the director of photography for the special effects unit. There's a scene right before Baragon destroys the oil field where Kawai and his people are just having a meeting, I guess, and they're all wearing these sort of uniform suits, and they're blue, and the lighting in the room is sort of blue. And he says it makes sense from the Japanese perspective that scene has a lot of blue in it. And I was curious because he doesn't elaborate. So I was looking up what blue represents, what significance it has in Japanese culture. And it represents purity, which doesn't really make any sense, but it also represents loyalty. So it's possible that he was referring to Kawai being a loyal soldier and a loyal Japanese. But again, he's not, even though he was part of the Axis powers in World War II and working with, to us, the bad guys. He gets along fine with Bowen, and they work together to figure out how to stop Frankenstein and Baragon. So it's like I said, there's lots of layers, and there's a lot of complexity to the way the characters interact that you would think should be enemies, but they're able to put all that aside, put the past behind them, and work together toward a new goal.
I hadn't considered that, but no, I haven't listened to the commentary track in forever. I think I probably listened to it when I first discovered the movie, or rediscovered, got on my journey to watch these movies, and that was about it. So I don't remember much from the commentary track. Sounds like I need to go back and re-listen to it. Maybe I should have before our conversation. I feel like sometimes people write these kaiju movies off as being silly kids fare and that sort of thing, but there's so much more really going on. There's a complexity, and I mentioned this with Robert too when we talked about Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla, that for me the best kaiju movies are the ones that have more than just giant monsters beating things up. Yes, I love that. Yes, I love a guy in a suit beating up a model somewhere, or in this case, a guy in a exaggerated Frankenstein makeup beating up a guy in a lizard suit. That's cool. But the reason I think this movie is so strong for me is the human stuff going on as well.
Of course, you need a good human story, and that with the MonsterVerse movies, there's so much, I'm just going to say, stupidity online about, we don't need human characters, just show us nothing but monster fights. And no, you have to have a good story and good viewpoint characters to make you care about the monster action, because otherwise the monsters destroying things has no consequence. There's no reason for you to be invested in anything that they're doing if you don't care about the human characters that are either being endangered by their fighting or are trying to help the good monster, or whatever's going on.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong. You need to have that connection, and I just feel a stronger connection to the characters in this one than I do a lot of the others. This is probably one of my favorite Toho movies.
Yeah, and both Kimura and Sekizawa are great writers. Honda was a phenomenal director. Tsuburaya, absolute master of special effects artistry. The people who are making these movies weren't just chumps making something silly to make a buck. Maybe Henry Saperstein was, but the crew at Toho, they took this very seriously. They weren't trying to make, they always tried to make their best. And like we were talking about too when we discussed Gamera versus Gyaos a while back, that there are layers to these things. Even the silliest, kiddiest ones like Gamera, most of the Gamera movies anyway, there's something else to them. If you watch them enough times, you start to sort of peel back the layers and think about the themes and implications of the story. Yeah,
for sure. And I've mentioned this, and I've said this repeatedly to people in person, on the podcast, strangers on the bus. Okay, maybe not, but these older movies, and especially the ones from different cultures than the one that I grew up in, they're fascinating because they serve as not just, an interesting story and a fun time, but you kind of look at them through squinted eyes and you see a documentary. You see what the culture and the society that was producing this film was like at the time, the mores, the rules, what society was like, all the different things going on behind the scenes, and the way the characters interact with each other. You've got this American guy running around in Japan trying to make up for the sins of the war that he's taken on himself. And that's just, again, I want to go back. I keep going back to that because I find it fascinating. Now, he's not the only guy in the movie. Obviously, there's a great cast here.
Yes.
And I think the connection and the chemistry that Nick Adams has with his co-stars, in particular, Kumi Mizuno, is just phenomenal.
Oh, absolutely. And that chemistry, well, the chemistry between him and Kumi Mizuno maybe went a little too far in real life.
I put it that way on purpose.
Yeah. But everyone there really did like him a lot. He was excited and happy to be in Japan. He got along really well with everyone. It was a difficult shoot because they were, he was speaking English. The Japanese actors were speaking Japanese, and they basically had translators on the set to help the actors recognize their cues and where they needed to talk and what they were reacting to. Like I said before, he gave it his all. He tried really hard. Robert Dunham, the guy who is the Seatopian Emperor in Godzilla vs. Megalon, originally tried out for the role of Bowen, which, I mean, it would have been fine because he's an okay actor, and he can speak Japanese, but he's not nobody in America knew who he was, so he wasn't going to sell it to a Hollywood star. But yeah, there are several great stories by some of the cast and crew. Sadamasa Arakawa, the effects director, was surprised by how small he was, apparently. That's something else he says in the commentary, because he's such a larger than life James Dean type in his American movies, so he was expecting this big burly macho guy, and then he gets off the plane and he's like, oh, you're short like me. Kumi Mizuno said that Nick Adams really immersed himself in the Japanese culture and the film industry. He really tried to understand Japan and its people. They spent a lot of time together, obviously. But when Russ came to Japan for War of the Gargantuas, he just didn't seem to like it at all and didn't try to talk to anybody. Yoshio Tsuchiya, the guy who plays Mr. Kawai, said, I'm probably mispronouncing that name because it sounds like I'm saying Mr. Cute. Because Kawaii is... Anyway. He said, Nick knew that after shooting for the Japanese version, his voice would be dubbed into Japanese and vice versa in the United States. I told him for the American version, you must get Henry Fonda for me, and if you do, I'll get Toshiro Mifune to do yours. And he said that when, of course, that didn't happen. I can't remember the name of the voice actor who dubbed him in this, but when Nick was leaving Japan, he asked Tsuchiya for an autographed photo. And he said, well, why do you want a photo of me? And Adam said, I want to put it in a frame and have it in my room. And at the time, he thought he was just being flattering. And then later on, Tomoyuki Tanaka, the Toho producer, went to America and visited Nick. And when he came back, he told Tsuchiya, he really does have your picture framed in his room. Like, he just really loved these people, made a lot of friends, and that lasted through the rest of his unfortunately short life.
Yeah, it's true. It's unfortunate that we lost Nick. I say Nick like he was a friend of mine. It's unfortunate we lost him when we did. But no, you can definitely tell there's this sense of enthusiasm and compassion and just joy going on there. And I wish I knew more about Nick Adams' story. I don't know much about it, to be completely honest. I just don't. He's always made me a fan in anything that he does. You mentioned Die Monster Die earlier. A huge fan of that one. Huge fan of that. And again, he just looks like he's having a grand time doing these things. Do we want to talk about the Kumi Mizuno thing at all?
I mean,
with him and Nick?
I don't know that there's a lot to talk about. They allegedly had an affair that led to Adams getting divorced.
Yeah,
but she's also said that he, that she turned down his advances because she was engaged at the time, and so, I mean, probably they did, but I don't know. Not something really need to dwell on, I guess.
Yeah, it doesn't change the movie,
right,
for me.
And it doesn't change how much we enjoy them as actors.
Exactly. And their performance, again, is so good. It's their chemistry together, working together. It's just fantastic.
Yeah. So, when one of the times that Akira Takarada came to G-Fest, someone asked him in the Q&A panel what it was like working with Nick Adams. And his answer was, Nick was a very horny boy.
Oh, no! No, I know what that means, but what does that even mean? Well, good for you, Nick, I guess. Anyway, What else you want to talk about with the movie? You said you had some notes there. What else did you want to mention?
Oh yeah, I've been deleting as we go along, so I don't hopefully don't repeat myself. Oh, one thing, after filming Wrapped, Saperstein decided we want another monster, and because he had authority to do so, told Honda, "You got to give me another monster." And it's like, well, the movie's done. I'm like, I don't care, give me another monster. So they had to scramble to rebuild some of the forest set, get back as much of the crew as they could, get Frankenstein back, and make him fight a giant octopus. Which, you know, it looks like they didn't have a lot of time to film, but it's not one of the better effects in the movie. So when they sent the footage to Saperstein to cut into the American version, he went, that doesn't look that good, and just scrapped it anyway. So you can see this footage out there, but he made him go to all this extra trouble, and then they never got to, you know, didn't end up using the footage. There is one other sequence that looks a little phony and is kind of notorious.
Okay.
The scene where Baragon eats the horse. That the horse puppet is really silly. There's a company called Revoltech that used to have a license to do Toho monsters, and I have the Baragon figure they did, and it comes in a little horse corral and a little toy horse next to them. But according to Tsuburaya, he did that on purpose, made it look, in his words, he said it was funny, because he thought that it would be too upsetting. Like, the movie was already kind of a horror movie, and having Baragon eat a cute horse, he thought would just be a step too far. And so, again, according to him anyway, he intentionally made that horse look not convincing so that the kids wouldn't be too upset by it, I guess. Because while Honda just wanted to make movies and make statements, Tsuburaya was much more wanting to entertain children as well, so he didn't like it when the movies got too dark. Like, you know, he was the one who put the Shay dance in Monster Zero when Godzilla does the little hop and skip thing after they beat Ghidorah. But there's a scene in the Japanese cut that's not in the American one, where some school children find a bunch of dismembered rabbits in their science classroom before Frankenstein gets big. This is when he's running around eating people's pets and stuff in the beginning of the movie. And it's really graphic. But you know, Tsuburaya wouldn't have had anything to do with that, because that was the main part of the shoot. So it's interesting that he tried to tone down the violence in the parts that he was making, but then there's this horrific scene with a bunch of mutilated bunnies.
Well, I think to War of the Gargantuas too, where, you know, it eats a woman, and in the American cut spits out the remains.
Right.
Dude, that's a lot.
Yeah. But, you know, maybe Tsuburaya is like a lot of us animal lovers who like horror movies, that, you know, off as many people as you want, but don't hurt the dog kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Maybe he didn't think that was so outrageous.
That's true. That's a possibility. Sure.
And I kind of buy that story of him intentionally dumbing down the horse scene, because pretty much all the rest of the effects in the movie are fantastic. And he was really getting a lot of mileage out of that Oxbury optical printer that he made Toho buy him, that he first used in Mothra vs. Godzilla, because there's a lot of really good composite shots. That scene where, toward the end, when they're racing toward the mountainside where Frankenstein and Baragon are fighting, and Frankenstein steps out onto the road.
Yes.
And lays down the body of their fellow scientist that he rescued. Man, that scene looks fantastic.
It really does.
And it helps that Frankenstein and Baragon are much smaller monsters too. That's always something in a kaiju movie, when you have a smaller kaiju, or like the Daimajin movies are another good example of that, where the smaller the monster, the more detailed you can make the sets. And it really helps to hide some of the phoniness, I guess.
You're not wrong. Again, you get a little bit more detail. It's harder, you know, once things start to get to a particular size. to kind of maintain believability.
Yeah.
And maybe that's something I hadn't really thought about that, but maybe that's one of the reasons why I like this one so much is it just the detail seems to be better and something I hadn't really considered.
Yeah, and the miniature work is great too, especially when Baragon attacks the oil field. I think that's better than a lot of stuff in Godzilla movies, and I would say almost on par with Gorath. I don't know if you've seen Gorath.
I have.
That one's not. Yeah, the effects. That's probably Tsuburaya's best miniature work. But the oil field getting trashed in this looks pretty phenomenal too.
Oh, it looks so good, so good. Well, I want to talk about the music because that's, of course, I do. I love the score. It's Akira Ifukube, so of course I'm going to love it. The man was a master. At first listen, sometimes a lot of his themes start to sound alike.
And he did reuse a lot of them too.
And he did, and Toho, did, and that's just part of the, part of the course, I guess, part of the deal. But I think there's some real interesting stuff happening in the score here that I really enjoy.
You can hear the beginning of a lot of themes that he used again later in this movie. So I think most of the stuff in Frankenstein Conquers the World is original to this movie.
Yeah.
But you can hear snippets of things that were rearranged or re-recorded with different instruments later. He used a lot of bass flute in this one, which apparently there was only one of those in Japan at the time of the recording of this, so it gave it kind of an unusual sound.
Well, that's awesome. That makes it even better for me. I love it even more now. So there have been a couple of soundtrack releases for this over the years. You can pick it up on CD. Looks like in Japan mostly, but Amazon is your friend. Amazon Japan is your friend if you want to get your hands on it. It's really good stuff. It's really good work, and it's one that I do find myself going back and listening to. I listen to film scores all the time. Big surprise, right? But I listen to film scores all the time. I use them for inspiration for my writing and just for fun. It's my go-to. Well, that and BC Boys and Digital Underground, but film scores a lot, and and this is one that I find myself going back to quite a bit. I love it, and it's got some really unique things, like you said, you would hear later in some of the future films that Toho would do. Plus, one of the soundtrack releases, I think multiple soundtrack releases actually, now that I think about it, you get some of the sound effects too. And as a sound guy, that's just awesome.
Yeah, that's something I would love. There's so much knowledge about the special effects process and the production of the movies and that kind of thing. But something that I don't think there's a lot of scholarship or research on is the sound effects from these Toho movies. And I mentioned that earlier at the beginning with the opening sequence. But they're so, the sound of the monsters falling down, the explosion noises, the noise, the monster roars, of course. We know how Godzilla was done and how a lot of those were done. But yeah, somebody needs to dig into the archives of Toho and find out who did their Foley and how. Because I would love to know the origin of all of these noises that that are as familiar as the music, I think, to those of us who watch these movies obsessively over and over again. That you hear that sound of a monster's body hitting the ground, or the sound of a tank cannon firing. And it's kind of a warm hug, like, oh, that's familiar, and it makes me happy.
I would love that. So Toho, if you're listening, I'm open. I can get time off from work. I can hop on over to your, and just hop on a plane and check out your library. Just let me know. And it's that's how that works, right? You just kind of say on a podcast and then.
Yeah, definitely.
That's how that works. You think Toho's listening?
I mean, I got all the way to standing outside the gates of Toho Studios, and they didn't let me in, so, Got to take a picture with the Godzilla statue, that's it.
Yeah, that's one better than me, man. That's something that Beth and I want to do so badly, is go to Japan someday. Just someday. Well, I'm really glad that we got a chance to revisit this. Like I said, it's been almost 400 episodes, if not more than, since I've talked about this one on the show. And I know that there have been jokes made about eventually I'm going to run out of movies to talk about here on the show. Because, it's this classic monster movie. It's just a limited pool to pull from. And yeah, I'm still always finding new things to talk about, but revisiting a favorite is always something that I look forward to doing. Having an opportunity, especially during Kaiju to revisit one of my favorites, one of my favorite Frankenstein monster portrayals, one of my favorite film scores, one of my favorite non-Godzilla Toho films, period, was just a treat. So I want to thank Bryan for taking the time to be part of the show this week. And we need to make sure that people check out your books and your other stuff going on. What was the name of the current release again?
Putting the Ground to Sleep and Other Weird Tales. And that can be found on Amazon, or get in touch with me. I've got copies if anyone wants one signed for some inexplicable reason. I'm still writing for...
Well, okay. How do people get a hold of you then? What's the best way to do that?
Just find me on Facebook, I suppose.
Oh, okay.
That's it. That's really the only social media I use. So
okay, fair enough.
I'm around. And I'm still writing for Scream Magazine. Haven't had a new one with them for a little while, but they publish every other month, and so it's always interesting to watch for the drop of the new cover announcement and see, oh, did they use one of mine this week or this month? I mentioned before the voiceover work. I did one for a band called Coagulate on their 2022 rehearsal demo, and then upcoming there's one called Adversion. Working on plenty of other writing projects now, hoping to have another book out by this fall.
Right.
But,
well,
I'll announce what that is when I actually
is.
finish it. Yes.
I know what that book is, and I'm super excited about it. That'll be very cool. And what about any other podcasting stuff that you're doing these days? You appearing on any other shows or anything? Or
I was just recently on a podcast with some friends of mine from here in the Midwest called I Like It Spooky, and we talked about Jean Rollins' Demoniacs. So a little different focus than MKR, but arty French horror movies from the 70s. And of course, none of them liked it. Those movies aren't for everybody.
No, not really.
I love them though. I love all kinds of horror, monsters. Give it all to me.
Horror, monsters, give it all to me. That's a t-shirt. That's cool. Well, I'll make sure there's a link in the show notes to your books or to your Amazon page. Do you have an Amazon author?
I do, yes.
Okay, excellent. I'll make sure there's a link to that because it also includes links to the anthologies in which your short stories have appeared. So I'll make sure there's a link to that as well. And of course, Amazon affiliate links. It helps us out as well if you go and check out any of Bryan's stuff. I'm a fan of his writing, so Monster Kid Radio seal of approval. Boom, check it out.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
That out for sure. And make sure you let him know Monster Kid Radio sent you. Bryan, thank you for doing this, man.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I always love talking about kaiju.
All right, that brings us to the end of this episode of Monster Kid Radio. Thanks for being here. Thanks for tagging along and retweeting tweets and sharing posts on Facebook. Please join us over on Twitter and Facebook and Reddit and Discord and Patreon. You can find links to all of this over on our website at monsterkidradio.net. You're going to find out everything you need to know about Monster Kid Radio over there, including links to everything that we've talked about, including Bryan Clark's author page over on Amazon and our Amazon affiliate links. If you're going to do any shopping at Amazon, please consider using the Amazon affiliate links. It doesn't cost you anything extra, but it does help us out. But of course, the best thing you can do to help us out is just retweeting tweets and sharing posts and letting people know about what we do here at Monster Kid Radio, or Kaiju Kid Radio, as it were. Speaking of which, next week is the final week of Kaiju 2023, and we've got a weird one coming up. We're going to be talking with a new person, somebody we've never talked about or talked with on the show. His name's Roger Cassell, and we're going to talk about a South Korean kaiju film. I know, South Korean and kaiju, kaiju is actually a Japanese term, but you know what I mean. We're going to be talking about the movie Space Monster Wangmagwi. This is something that was just released on Blu-ray here in the States for the very first time last year. It was considered a lost film for a very long time, even though technically it wasn't. It was just locked up due to copyright issues on the Korean Film Archives. But it's now available, and we're going to talk about it next week with Roger. And I've already recorded that. I had a really good time talking with Roger. We're going to have him back on the show in the future. But yeah, next week, That's going to be his first appearance here on the show to talk about space monster Wangmagwi. After that, we're probably going to play some recordings from the recent Monster Bash Summer 2023 edition. Mike Ramsey has sent in some awesome recordings from that event, so we're going to do some of that in the month of August. And then who knows? We'll do some other cool stuff down the line, including in September. I want to let you know, and my wife's actually sitting in the room right now, and I haven't shared this with her, but I just found out that Monster Kid Radio has been approved to be at Rose City Comic Con this year. It's happening in September. What are we going to be doing there? A look at the past 10 years of Monster Kid Radio. It's going to be a lot of fun. I hope to have some other Monster Kid Radio irregulars joining me during this panel. It's going to be a live recording. If you're in the area, I would love to see you. Please come by and track me down. I'll be the guy wearing the Hawaiian shirt looking like he's having the most fun in the room. It's going to be a really good time. We'll talk about it more on monsterkidradio.net as we get more information. I don't know what day we're going to be doing our thing yet. They haven't lined that part up yet, and that'll determine who can actually join me because everybody's got day jobs, and well, just stay tuned. It's going to be really cool. Thanks for being here. That does bring us to the end of the show, so I need to sign off by letting you know that Monster Kid Radio is a registered service mark of Monster Kid Radio, LLC. All original content of Monster Kid Radio by Monster Kid Radio, LLC is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution, I blew it, but I say it every week, and you know what I mean. Except it doesn't apply to the song Berlin. That is copyright 2022. The band is Wave Electric. You can find them at waveelectric.bandcamp.com. The song Berlin is on their album, self-titled debut LP. Check them out and let them know that Monster Kid Radio sent you. My name's Derek M. Cook. I'll talk to everybody next week. Ciao.